in one of his books, probably more than one actually, the neuroscientist Antonio Damasio talks about emotions and feelings, and he says that although we often assume that emotions are something that's a relatively rare event, you occasionally feel happy or sad or something like that, they're actually an omnipresent part of our experience, and we're having emotional responses constantly. And there's no such thing as a sort of neutral emotional state outside of deep coma or persistent vegetative state, something like that, that we're constantly experiencing these small emotions. If small is the right word, complex emotions. He distinguishes emotions from feelings, which he says are the conscious perception of emotions. So whilst we might be getting emotional responses to situations, we might not have strong feelings or any feelings at all regarding situations, because feelings are the perception of those emotions. So by analogy, something like the nerve endings that are firing in the soles of my feet, for example, as I'm walking, they're certainly firing, and then the signals are being sent to the brain, and a lot of the actions that I'm taking as I modify my step, or I take the weight off a foot because it's stepping on something slightly uneven, something like that. All that information is going in, but unless I make myself focally aware of it, I'm not perceiving it as such. It's kind of analogous to emotions. So in Damasio, we have this image, at least I have this image, of the brain or the mind as a kind of pool, or the surface of a pool, which is constantly rippling, moving currents and concentric circles spinning out from disturbances on the surface of this pool. A lot of those come from within, from underneath the surface. Thoughts, cognitive processes that are happening, little re-entry loops of conscious processing, which cause ripples on the surface of this pool. But some of those ripples also emerge from the outside world. So that as I am walking, perhaps I'll step on a particularly sharp stone, which might, even if I'm not consciously aware of it, or maybe if I am consciously aware of it, might send an impulse to that surface and cause it to ripple in a particular way from the outside. So most of the time I don't perceive that pattern, perhaps only at certain times. Perhaps at certain times chaos breaks out, or maybe a tsunami forms, or a standing wave is created on the surface of that pool, either from internal subaquatic activity or from some sort of wind blowing from the outside world. And if that standing wave, if that pattern on the surface of the pool is stable enough, maybe then it becomes self-evident and it becomes a feeling. And I do get this wave of happiness sweeping over me, or this wave of sadness, or something else, or something more subtle. But most of the time I imagine that probably wouldn't happen, and there would just be small ripples of enthusiasms and discouragements, I think Damasio calls them, the small pains and pleasures of everyday life. I'm just wondering to what extent that idea, and this is, I'm not sure this is, I don't think Damasio uses this metaphor of the pool, it's probably too purple for him, but I'm just wondering to what extent that. So it's got this a very oddly shaped cloud. I'm just going to point the camera. I don't know if that'll come out of this video. Anyway, I'm just wondering if that sort of analogy, this some sort of rippling pool, works if it's translated across to the physical corporeal body. Certainly in some, for example, actor training methods or dance training techniques, there is this notion of the neutral body. The neutral body. It usually just involves, it usually just means something like standing still, really. Or standing, with feet shoulder width apart, arms by your side, chin tucked in, that kind of stuff. Nothing special. Relaxed. Head behind the knees. It's one of the phrases I associate with that position. And notionally, when one's in that position, and I'm aware this is quite an old-fashioned idea, but one is not involved in any communication. It's the nearest one can get to a kind of blank canvas. But the fact that it is called neutral is interesting because it seems to be aiming to parallel that idea of neutral mindset in which there is no emotional disturbance, no feeling taking place, which, as we know from Damasio and others, is never the case. There's always ripples on the surface of the pool. So I'm wondering, when you're standing in neutral, if I was to stand with my feet shoulder width apart and hands hanging loosely by my side, with my chin tucked in, a breath of air behind my knees, to what extent would I be truly neutral, and to what extent would I be presenting myself as the apparently still surface of a pool on which there is actually a lot of action taking place, small currents and little waves moving across the surface of my proprioception, showing themselves up as little twitches and adjustments of weight, and disturbances in breathing patterns and irregularities in the saccading of the eyes, that kind of a thing. And of course occasionally those ripples might form into a standing wave or a tsunami or a regular pattern. And I would call that walking, perhaps, maybe talking.